Hello, my name is Yuping Chang and this is Shadow Task 8. So for Shadow Task 8 we are implementing a simple inventory system and we have created collectible items um, and there you go. Oops, missed one. And so we've collected 3 items into our inventory and here they are. So for our items we could also remove them and it will be dropped back into the world. So we can remove it here, and we can even remove this one here. And we could go back and pick them up in any order, and they will appear in our inventory again. And there they are, collect them all, and they're in there again. Oops, there we go. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for the demo of the inventory system. I do have to say, I do want to make note that I do want to point out that the assets that I am using for the collectible items are not my own. They all the credit for that belongs to Fate Boom, which is the creator of the collectible item assets that you saw and the ones that I'm using. And so I just want to point it out that these are not mine. I'm not taking credit for them, and I'm properly crediting Fate Loom for using their free assets. All right, so getting into it step by step. So we made a input action for inventory, which is just a boolean checking did you are you opening or closing the inventory, and we mapped it to the key tab. And so whenever the player presses tab, they are opening the inventory as seen here. So again, similar to how interact works, we are not trying to interact every game tick, and so we only want to interact once whenever we press the not interact. We only want to open up the inventory whenever we press tab, and so on started only happens once. And so if uh, if the inventory is not open, then we want to open it, and if it is already open, we want to close it. And what this here is saying is that if the inventory is open, we want to be able to see the mouse cursor and uh, move our mouse around to actually access and manipulate the items inside of our inventory. And then same is vice versa. Uh, so this would just be the opposite. We don't want to see the mouse when we are not inside of the inventory. And that is pretty much it for how to open up the inventory. Um, so how we actually add items to our inventory, we are essentially building off of the interact code. So the interact code is just a line trace, and it is trying to find the collectible items off of the line trace. And so if we do get a hit and it is the interactable item, the collectible item, then we would essentially add that item to our inventory. And essentially, what this code here is saying is if if an item already exists inside that slot, we want to pick the next slot and fill that empty slot, with the new item we just found. And essentially, that is what this whole code is running, and um, and it is what this is saying. So if it is filled, keep cycling until you find a slot that is available, empty slot, and then fill that slot with the item we just found, and then update the inventory so that it contains everything everything that is inside the inventory. And so if uh, we we are using specifically a break because if we don't use a break, then what will end up happening is uh, creating we will end up creating duplicate items for every slot, for every empty slot. And so every empty slot will end up being filled with this single interaction, with the single collection of one item. And so we don't want that, and so we want to break that. So um, we want to break it so that we want to break the loop so that it stops on when it needs to fill an empty slot. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for how we are able to add an item to our inventory. So for the uh, inventory itself is actually just a widget. Is the widget acts as a list, and so the size of the list is 20. It doesn't have to be 20. I made it 20 for demonstration purposes, just so that uh, it could have been 3, but it could have been 3, it could have been 5. Just chose 20 randomly because I feel like 20 made it look more realistic to actually be able to see that this is the inventory space. But yeah, so the the widget, the not the widget, uh, the actor component is essentially creating the widget so that it is essentially creating the widget and making the list, and then updating the list. By updating the list, I mean loading inventory. So so it uses the widget to apply to implement it visually, but it is creating the list for how many items can be stored inside of our inventory. All right, and going into the actual widget itself, um, inventory widget, you know. And so for the inventory itself, it doesn't look like there's anything here, but it's the widget itself is an overlay uh, that utilizes wrap boxes, and the wrap box uh, is just a bunch of slots. It's just a bunch of um, individual slots that are tied together, and so uh, if we go into the graph, the is it the event graph? No, it's in the function and the load inventory. So it is grabbing the wrap box and and taking the item taking that item from the inventory and applying it visually to that slot. And so um, it is grabbing all the items, all the individual variables of the item, and then to applying it to the slot. And um, the slot itself is just uh, is just an image. Is just an image and a button of what the item is inside of the inventory. And this is where so it would show what it looks like, and then um, when you go and click on the image of the item to remove it from the inventory, it would it would essentially spawn it in front of the player because that's where I have it set up. I've set a location that to be right in front of the player to spawn the item that was stored and is being removed from the inventory. And essentially, we are nullifying that, and we are resetting that slot to be empty. and then we are updating the slot and updating the we are resetting the slot and updating the inventory to reflect that the item is no longer inside of our inventory. Um, and that's pretty much it for the slot, and that's pretty much it for the inventory. Um, and the inventory looks this way because I made the red box, not the red box, the overlay sized to content, and so because um, because right now there is nothing inside, uh, because there's nothing inside. There are no slots assigned right now, um, meaning essentially there are 0 slots. That is why it just looks empty. Um, but yeah, when we get but if you review the demo, there was 20 slots because we had sized it to be 20, and so it was a 5 by 4. But yeah, so that's why it looks like this. But in game, it's completely different because it updates once it actually is in game and once it actually has items inside of the inventory. So how we create those items is actually uh, through a structure, which is here. So we are creating an item structure, and we are getting the name for the item, the image, that the image for the visual representation inside the inventory, and then um, the item itself, how it looks like inside the world space. And the item is the item itself is empty. It's all empty, but we make it instance editable. We make it instance editable so that we could change these. We could change it as we want in game. And so in the editor viewport, in the editor mode, uh, all of this would be it would essentially be empty, as you can see here. Everything here is empty. So when we are inside the scene and we want to set it to be something else, we would essentially just assign this to be a different thing, and so it is essentially using the same blueprint. It allows us to use the same blueprint, but be different items. And so there's the same blueprints, it's just collectible item, but it is all different. So it's a star. This one is a star. This one is a gem, and this one was the heart. And so that's the 3 different items. And so that's how the structure would work to define what the item is. And then covered the collectible item already. And the collectible item is just on construct. The construction script is just saying we are setting what it would look like. And it doesn't have to be Niagara system asset. I just chose it because uh, that's how the imported asset looked. And so I decided to use the Niagara instead of the static mesh. Um, and so that is why I am updating it to be, instead of using the sphere, I'm using the Niagara. Uh, but both the sphere and Niagara are just placeholders because, again, for the item, the instance editable item, we want to set it inside of the scene itself and not inside of the blueprint. And then when the item is collected uh, and the item is inside of the inventory, we want to destroy the actor. We want to destroy the item inside the world space, inside the game world. And so uh, we are here. We can still add in code if we wanted to, but if we wanted the item to do something, For example, if we wanted to like jump up and then be collected, disappear, we would implement the code for that here, and then we are delaying. Specifically, we are delaying a very short amount of time because if we immediately destroy, that could lead to an issue of the item not being collected in time, and so it would be destroyed, and the item would the item would essentially destroy itself before it was ever collected into the inventory, and so that is why we add a very brief delay. And I believe that covers pretty much everything. Um, that covers pretty much everything. Oh, and uh, yeah. So if you're wondering uh, if the Niagara is still able to read um, from the line trace, no, it's not, and that is why I added an empty. Well, it's not an empty, but it's I made an invisible sphere. I added an invisible sphere to be able to be read by the line trace.